Hi, I'm Attorney Ramsey Bahrawy, and this is Your Money, Your Life. Today we will discuss strategies for managing your retirement account in order to sustain your retirement lifestyle. Joining me today is Jonathan Breen, a lawyer who currently is a financial advisor with Ameriprise Financial, a firm offering comprehensive financial planning and wealth management services to families across America. As a financial advisor, Jonathan advises clients to help them achieve their financial planning goals by utilizing tax, investment, insurance, cash management, and various other financial strategies. Jonathan, welcome to Your Money, Your Life. It's great to have you on the program.
Well, thanks for having me, Ramsey.
Now, Jonathan, when people first put money into their retirement account, they're usually doing that in order to build their nest egg, so to speak. In other words, to accumulate. But as people approach retirement, they want to make a transition into income. What things should people be thinking about when they make that transition?
Well, Ramsey, the important things to think about at first are what are the risks associated with retirement? So what do we have to combat over time? Okay.
So what kind of risks should people be thinking about?
Absolutely. So the first risk that we worry about in retirement is longevity. And put simply, what longevity is the fact that we're living longer and longer in retirement. So planning for 30 or 40 years worth of income from our assets is a difficult task. What stems from that is the second big risk, which is inflation. So if we're living 3, 4, 5 years in retirement, not a big deal. But when we're looking at 30 years of retirement, 40 years of retirement today, inflation is going to have a very meaningful impact.
What, on average, what is the annual inflation rate?
So historically, inflation's been somewhere around 3%. So what that actually means to an individual like ourselves in retirement is that over the course of about 24 to 25 years, the cost of goods is going to double. So
wow.
I'm sure you can imagine or you can remember what the cost of gas was back in the 80s compared to what it is today, or a stamp at that time. And it has a very meaningful impact today.
Right. I mean, I remember when stamps were a nickel. You know, they're not anymore. You put another zero behind that.
I don't, but I do remember when they were much less expensive. So those are the key risks in terms of the fact that we have a long time to plan for in retirement. The next set of risks that we see is that obviously to combat those we have to invest. We have to take some risk, and that involves market volatility and what happens when we see some ups and some downs in the market over time. So a lot of people remember 2007, 2009 when we had some tough times, and unfortunately, if that was the beginning of retirement, that was a tough time for everyone.
So how do you go about measuring somebody's risk tolerance if they're invested in the stock market? I mean, are there certain questions that you ask or certain things that you look for?
Very much so. For us, it's more, we ask questions around goals. So that's the important part for us, is what goals are we trying to achieve, and how can we accomplish that and try to do it as consistently, as stably as possible.
Do you ask them if the market goes down 20%, will that keep you awake at night, or can you handle it?
Absolutely.
Do you have a strong enough stomach to handle that?
Absolutely, absolutely. So there's some people that you see a loss of a few dollars and it's gonna keep them up at night, and there's some people that are in it for the long haul, so to say, and I can stomach those losses from time to time.
So there is a process where you can make that determination.
Absolutely.
Okay. Any other risks that people should be considering?
Sure. So if we take a step out from market volatility, the next risk is withdrawal rate. So how much can we afford to take from our assets each and every year in retirement, while still knowing that we're going to outlive or that our money is going to outlive us. Okay. So traditionally, that's been a tough risk to combat. In the world that we're in today, it's even tougher because interest rates are very low, and the stock market has some issues with it, and it's a big risk for us.
Well, I was going to say, wouldn't withdrawal rate to some degree be affected by the performance of the assets?
Of course, of course.
And so I would think that your withdrawal rate, you could adjust it up or down depending on how well or how poorly your assets are performing.
You can try, and obviously there's different ways to try to combat that withdrawal rate by being more traditionally aggressive with your investments, trying to see some more growth over time. But obviously nothing is an exact science, which means that making adjustments over time is very important.
Now, what seems to be discussed quite frequently in the popular media is people investing in dividend-producing stocks. course, stocks are equities, and they're a lot more volatile than, let's say, bonds or even cash. Is it dangerous for somebody who's in retirement to be investing in stocks that deliver dividends?
There's risks associated with any type of investment. Okay. Something like that, obviously the risk is that we lose some of the principal of the stock itself, and that the dividend as a result gets reduced over time. Okay. So there's always risks, and combating them is difficult, and it's a balancing act.
Okay. What about bonds? What are the risks associated with bonds? Bonds are basically where you're lending money to either a municipality or a government or a company, right?
That's exactly what they are. Yeah. The risks associated with bonds today, there's ample of them. Okay. So we've seen about a 35-year run where bonds have done very well. So interest rates come down, and when interest rates come down, bond values go up. Right. So we've seen 35 years in a row, plus or minus, that we've seen interest rates come down and bond values go up. We're at a very low interest rate point now. There's not too much further down that they can go. So if interest rates start to go back up, those bond values potentially could go down.
Interest rates and bond values move in opposite directions.
Exactly.
So the higher the rate, the lower the bond value, and vice versa.
Exactly.
Okay. All right, so people have to be concerned, because we're in a low interest rate environment, that if they're currently holding bonds, and if the rates go up, the actual value of their bonds will go down.
That's a possibility, yes.
Okay. Is there any way for people to mitigate that risk?
So when we talk about mitigating risk, the important thing to understand is which one of these risks are we planning for? Which one are we trying to combat? Right. And we need to have different parts of our strategy in place to combat all of them. Okay. So some of our shorter term money, the income that we need in the next couple of years, we want to make sure that we're putting it into more stable investments that we're confident we're not going to lose value from.
Right.
At the same time, those longer term investments, we're trying to combat those longer term risks like longevity, inflation that we talked about already, and we need to take a little bit of risk to make sure we grow them over time.
You know, if you go online, you can find these calculators, and you find these basically formulas. You know, if you're if you're between such and such an age, you should be such a percent in stock and such a percent. But if you're 10 years older, then they readjust that. How can that actually apply to every single person? Because isn't every person's circumstances somewhat different?
Everyone's circumstances is completely different. It's a tough question to answer. It's a very personal question to answer as to how much time do we really need to plan for. Some people's health is more questionable than others, so we might not need to plan for as long. Some people only have themselves to take care of. Some people have a significant other or a parent of their own that's ill that they need to take care of. So all of these things come into play when we're trying to determine what assets, what investments make sense. And like you said, those online calculators, they don't know you. No. They don't know you from me. No. Other than our ages are different, and that's a tough tough assumption to make.
I would think so. I would think so. Is it smart for somebody who's got, you know, a reasonable amount of money in a retirement account, seeing that the interest rates are low, to move it all into a money market account?
I would never. I don't know that I would suggest that. It's a balancing act. It's always going to be a balancing act, and it's very dependent on their personal situation. I'm sure there is a situation out there that would warrant that. Yeah. However, in general, what we're looking at is time, what period of time we want to use money, and how do we make the appropriate decisions based on that time frame, as opposed to, hey, we're in this type of market, we want to do just X because of where we are today. Things will change.
Let's consider a scenario here. Let's say we have a husband and wife couple. They're in their 70s, and they're required now. They're at least 70 and a half. They're required to take minimum distributions from their retirement account. Any strategies in terms of how to approach that required minimum distribution?
Sure, there's plenty of them. Usually when we get to that point, what we start planning for is how do we leave the footprint we want for the next generation. So how do we leverage some financial solutions, as well as an individual like yourself, to put together the legal framework to leave that money and reduce the tax consequences over time. It's a very personal decision. It's a very unique situation to be in, but there's a lot of possibilities with it.
Okay, let's change the scenario. Let's say we've got, again, a husband and wife, and they are 65, 66, and they're entering into retirement and they have a retirement account. Any strategies in terms of how to take withdrawals from that retirement account?
Again, it goes back to our goals. It goes back to our goals. We've got to look at the scenario as a whole. Do we have some non-retirement assets that we want to use? When do we want to use them? What are we trying to accomplish? Do they want to stay here close to their children? Do they even have children? Or do they want to potentially buy a second house somewhere? So what are their goals? What are you looking to achieve? And then back into what our strategy is going to be.
Okay. The point that you're making is it's critical to understand what people's goals are.
It's completely critical.
Which is exactly what we do in estate planning.
Exactly.
We need to know what the goals are.
Exactly. So the legal documents, the legal framework that you want to put together is based on where those people are and where they're trying to get. And we're doing the same thing from the financial standpoint.
Now, you mentioned that if somebody's fortunate enough to have assets outside of a retirement account, then there's some decisions to make. Is it wise to take money first from the retirement account or first from the non-retirement account? What is the most tax efficient way to do this?
Again, and I hate to go back to it's always dependent on the situation, but it is. When we get to that situation, what we're looking to do is make sure that we don't pay more in taxes than we have to. Okay, so limiting our tax consequences over time, determining how and when to pay taxes. So obviously, most retirement accounts have income tax that is associated with them. So is it better to take the income tax liability today, or is it better to push it off if there's other forms of income that are still coming into the household and so forth?
Is there any room with regards to the planning of a retirement account for an instrument like an annuity?
Of course, of course.
Talk about that.
So when we look at retirement planning, the first place that we start is covering our essential expenses. So these are the things that we have to pay, whether it's roof over our head, food on the table, clothes on our back, those sorts of things that we can't avoid paying. And what we want to do with those is we want to cover them with stable forms of income. So that starts with Social Security and pensions, of course, but something like an annuity potentially could be an option to cover any additional gap to make sure that we have that stable form of income. And then we move out into the other things that we want to pay for. But those essential expenses need to be as stably covered as possible.
Now, some people have a very real interest in leaving a legacy, whether it's to children or other family members or other loved ones. Is there a strategy in terms of managing a retirement account where you can provide for a legacy?
Of course, and there's multitudes of them. What we're looking for when we from a financial standpoint get to that legacy or that estate planning perspective is control and leverage. So the control part is, how do I continue to control my money so that I live the comfortable life that I want to? But the other part of control is, how do I limit taxes, not just for myself, but for the next generation or the entities that I want to leave money for. The other part is leverage. So how do I turn $1 today into multiple dollars tomorrow? And there's a lot of different opportunities to do that. I can't give you just one because, as I said, everything's very dependent on your situation and making sure that we make the best decisions for you based on what you're trying to accomplish and when you're trying to accomplish it.
What's the best strategy for somebody who's in retirement today and they need to supplement their Social Security income? What's the best strategy in this low interest rate environment for them to pursue?
Finding a stable form of income, a stable investment that we can combat those shorter term risks of volatility and withdrawal rate. And it's going to change from year to year. Based on the environment that we're in, it's always going to change. So taking a step back, taking a look at what options we have today, and really educating someone on what those options mean for their specific situation so that they can make a decision.
Do you recommend that as people go into retirement that they have a retirement budget?
So we look at a budget as a couple of different pieces. So I had mentioned those essentials expenses earlier. Those are the first piece of our budget, the things that we have to pay for. What we recommend beyond that is that we have a lifestyle budget. And those are the things that we want to pay for. So whether it's going to see family, traveling, spoiling our grandchildren, whatever it is in retirement that we really want to do, having a budget for that so that we can plan. Okay, and once we plan, we might be able to take more from our assets. We might have to take less from our assets over time. It depends. But when we have a starting point, that we know what we need to do, that's a very powerful thing, as opposed to just hoping year over year that we're making the right choices.
Well, the reason I'm asking the budget question is several years ago when I did bankruptcies, I haven't done it in a long time, one of the things that I noticed from my clients is none of them had a budget. None of them knew where their money was going.
So,
and I'm wondering if retirees are in the same boat.
I think everyone's in the same boat, Ramsey, to tell you the truth. Anyone that doesn't have a budget is just kind of living and dying by the wind, if you will. They're making a decision one month and then the next, as opposed to keeping themselves on track. I mean, take a professional athlete, for instance. If they didn't have a training regimen, would they really be as good at the sport that they play as they are?
It's a good point.
Probably not.
Yeah,
so
it's a good point.
Everyone should probably have a budget to follow.
Yeah, no, it just kind of makes sense to have a budget, so at least you know what your major costs are going to be, i.e. a roof over your head, food on the table, clothing, medicine. You know, these are the necessaries. They're the important things. Okay. So it's important for people in retirement to have a budget as well, and then they can take a look at their sources of income, and then make a determination as to whether they have enough or not enough income, and then what they can do to supplement the income. And one of the things to supplement is they can keep working, right?
Exactly. Exactly. So the flip side of some of these risks that we have today is that we also have some flexibility later into life. So because we're living longer, we're also usually healthier a little bit longer. So instead of retiring at 65, maybe it's 68, maybe it's 70, and then we still have an extended period of time in retirement, as opposed to being right on the edge of the end of life when we're making that retirement decision.
And I think something that people need to seriously consider also is the fact that some of the public benefits may be changing. Social Security may be changing, Medicare may be changing, Medicaid may be changing, and those changes will be, for the retiree, negative, not positive changes.
Very likely.
Yeah, very likely.
So once we go through those expenses that we need to pay and we want to pay, the next step is always planning for those things. So the benefits we get, the unexpected events around losses of Social Security, losses of pension, losses of a significant other's income during retirement, or the healthcare costs, which are getting extreme at this point. They're extremely expensive.
Or a recession like we had from 2007 to 2009. That wasn't expected either.
Of course, that's another possibility. And what we want to plan for is we want to plan so that if some unfortunate events happen like that, you're still going to be okay. You might not be as living quite the lifestyle that you wanted to, but you're still okay, and it's not the end of the world, so to say.
Now, you mentioned earlier that one of the risks is inflation risk, and you mentioned that the average annual inflation rate is about 3%. You also said something about your costs over 24 years are going to double. If the average retirement is 30 to 40 years, then somebody really has to plan out for their standard of living or the income to support their standard of living, rather, having to double.
Double over time. And it's a difficult thing. And what I can tell you is that going through a financial planning process where you can actually see on paper what that actually looks like, what the dollar amount looks like over time, what dollar amount you need today to flip that retirement switch and feel comfortable, is a very powerful thing to be able to do.
And I know you've mentioned it, but I'd like to highlight it again. Let's also understand that the monies that you're pulling out of your retirement account, there's an income tax that has to be paid. So you actually have less money in your retirement account than you think.
Very, very true. Very true. So most of our largest assets these days are our 401k or IRAs. So our work-based retirement plans. They're great. They're wonderful, but they have tax consequences to them in retirement.
Sure, they most definitely do. How can somebody assure themselves, or assure their loved ones also, that they won't be running out of money? You just said earlier, the average retirement is going to go out 30, 40 years. How does somebody know that their nest egg, whatever that amount may be, will last them for those 30 to 40 years. Is there anything they can do to assure themselves of that?
Unfortunately, there's never something that we can do to guarantee things. If we have another recession, like you said, it's going to be a tough time for anyone.
Right.
What we can do is we can plan. We can plan ahead. The earlier we start planning, the more comfortable we're going to be, and we can place money in better vehicles if we start planning earlier, so that taxes can be limited, so that some of those issues, some of the risks that we see with the market can be reduced, can be combated over time. So it's a tough thing to plan for. It's a reason why it keeps a lot of people up at night.
Well, what I'm hearing you say basically is people have to stay flexible.
Yep.
They have to be willing to adjust.
Absolutely.
In other words, you don't just take the plan and put it on cruise control and say, I'm all set.
Nope, absolutely not. So this is something that we recommend to our clients to review every year.
Right.
Take a look at every year, because not only is your situation as the client going to change every year, the world that we live in is going to change every year. Whether it's political changes or tax changes or whatever it is, everything is always going to be changing, and we need to make the appropriate adjustments based on that.
And actually, that's a political change is something that we didn't even talk about in terms of unforeseen events, right?
It's a possibility.
Yeah, and then of course there's global events too.
Of course.
Right?
Of course.
And I mean, we've seen more recently in the markets where the markets moved because of something that happened elsewhere. Really nothing to do with us, but it's a global economy.
But it affects us all the time.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right. So there's really nothing anyone can do to guarantee themselves that they're going to have enough money. It's just...
Everyone's going to be in a different situation. Everyone's going to be in a completely different situation. There's some individuals that are going to have enough money that they can pull most of it out and combat most of these risks very easily. There's going to be some others that there's some need to take on some risk over time to make sure that we keep growing our money over time. The problem is that the risks are different for different people, and there's risks no matter which direction you go. And we've got to combat the risks that are most relevant to your situation, as opposed to just, hey, how long is my money going to last? That's the only question that matters.
Let's talk about people who are significantly risk averse.
Okay.
How do you approach somebody who's significantly risk averse, who in today's economy is probably making less than 1% on their money?
Right.
And convince them that you need to move into something with a little more risk because there's a risk-reward ratio there.
Of course. The way we start with anyone is through education. Okay, so you understanding what these risks are that we've talked about today and how they affect you is the most important part. If we have the education, we usually are rational enough to make appropriate decisions. But most people have learned from their parents. They've learned from their grandparents who we were in a different scenario, a different world when those people were teaching us how to deal with money.
Right,
and as a result, re-educating and making sure that we're aware of the world we actually live in today and not the one that we might think we are is definitely the first step and the most important part.
And a lot of it also has to do with somebody's attitude.
Of course.
Right? I mean,
of course.
Everyone has a slightly different attitude towards money. Now, we talked earlier about assets that are outside of retirement. Is there any way, I want to look at that again, is there any way that you can protect assets that are outside of retirement from taxation, minimize the taxation?
So it depends on what type of tax that we're talking about. So income tax is one type. We have capital gains tax. We have interest and dividends 1099 tax that we have to pay, and it depends on what type of vehicle that we're in.
Let's talk about income tax.
Okay.
Is there any way to invest money outside of a retirement account in such a way that you minimize or even to some degree eliminate the income tax?
We're always going to have to pay tax. There's no way to avoid it. The question is, as you mentioned, how do we limit it over time? And saving into different tax-treated vehicles might mean that we pay tax today and we reduce tax later. It might mean that we don't pay tax today and we increase tax later. So the answer is there's always room for flexibility and that there's always different tax vehicles to be saving into. The question is which one is the most appropriate for your situation and when we're looking to use the money.
All right, that's fair enough. And again, it gets back to the original point you were making about goals.
Right, exactly.
So I'm hearing two things from you. There's goals and there's risk.
Yep.
And you kind of have to marry those two.
You do, and there's always both sides to each of those as well. So risk, we have short-term risk versus long-term risk, and they're very different. Our goals that are short-term often don't completely line up with our goals long-term. Spending $1 today is much more satisfying today than saving it for our longer-term goals. So putting a plan together that we know why we're doing the things that we're doing, and we know why they're important to ourselves, and we can remind ourselves of that is important.
You know, I have a client, and he actually has a pretty good attitude when it comes to retirement accounts. You know, his attitude is basically when I put that money into the retirement account, it's out of sight, out of mind.
Yep.
He doesn't worry about it.
Yep.
Which is a really good attitude.
That's a great attitude.
Yeah.
The way that someone put it to me at one point was that it's the way to pay yourself for later.
There you go.
To pay your future self. And obviously all of us want to be stable and healthy later in life, and that's a good way to start down that path.
And of course, the earlier you start, the better off you are.
Absolutely, absolutely. And unfortunately, it's a balancing act that a lot of my generation and younger have school loans and other things that we're trying to pay off, and balancing when we start saving for retirement is a tough process, and it's important to put a plan together early.
Now, if our viewers would like to contact you, how can they do that?
Sure. So phone, email, whichever one's easiest for them. My direct phone number is 617-580-4216. My email address is my first name and my last name, so JOHNATHAN.BREEN @AMPF.com.
Okay.
And either one of those is easy.
And you're with which company?
Ameriprise Financial.
Ameriprise, and which Ameriprise office?
So I'm at the corporate office, one of the corporate offices that's located in Charlestown, right outside of Boston.
Okay, super. Great place for us to stop. Today we learned that managing your retirement savings in today's financial environment can be fraught with complexity. Moreover, managing a retirement plan which aligns with your personal and retirement goals can present a significant challenge. One such challenge is developing a withdrawal strategy for funds in both retirement and non-retirement accounts. Jonathan Breen explained that it is recommended to delay withdrawals from accounts that provide tax-saving features. And of course, retirees who are older than age 70 and a half will want to prioritize required minimum distributions before all other distribution types in order to avoid penalties. Also remember that assets required for short-term use should be in safe, liquid investments. Additionally, it is critical to establish clearly defined goals, balanced by your risk tolerance and time horizon. Put another way, if your retirement plan is based on assumptions that are no longer valid, it may very well be time to modify your plan. Given today's low interest rate environment and volatile stock market, developing an investment plan can be both daunting and stressful. Therefore, the key is to stay flexible while developing an effective plan and strategy with a trusted advisor such as Jonathan Breen of Ameriprise Financial. A trusted advisor can help you to create a realistic plan and strategy that incorporates your income needs, lifestyle goals, and financial situation. In closing, thanks to my guest, Jonathan Breen of Ameriprise Financial. Jonathan,
thanks for having me.
Thank you. And as always, thank you to you, our viewers, for watching Your Money, Your Life. My name is Ramsey Bahrawy, Building Your Trust.